Okay, we're going to take a little look at ancient writing in several different ancient states, ancient civilizations. As we're going to see, uh, writing developed independently in different areas of the world for different reasons. We're going to look at Mesopotamia first. Then we'll look at Egypt. There's a really interesting video that I have. I cut it down from 50 minutes to just 20 minutes. You can watch the whole version, the 50-minute version if you want, on YouTube. But I'm going to give you the edited version about how archaeologists deciphered Egyptian hieroglyphs. We'll look at the Indus Valley, ancient China, Mesoamerica, the Maya, and then we'll look at in South America at the Inca and something called Quipu. Okay, so let's look at Mesopotamia first. Well, how did writing start, and when did it start, and how did archaeologists figure this out? Well, it was actually a very complicated process, because they had to start with writing that they had deciphered. So writing, from about 1000 BC. And as they started to find more and more things, they were able to go backwards in time until they got to what they thought was the beginnings. And it wasn't even writing at this point, but something that became writing. And it was a system, you can see here, of little clay objects that we tend to call tokens. Now, before we get into this, let's just discuss what writing actually is. Like, what is writing? You can see we're going to talk about the alphabet, which is our writing system. You can see here, that we're all used to. But, we would say that writing is a way of communicating the diversity of language and recording language with written symbols, right? That's essentially what writing is. So let's look at how it developed in Mesopotamia. So originally, they had these clay tokens. This was about 4000 BC. Each token represented different items that were being traded back and forth between people or used as tribute to pay the temples as taxes. This looks like a croissant, but it actually indicates metal. This is the head of a dog. This is a pomegranate. This is a jar. These represent sheep, these circles with lines in them. Each of these represented different goods. Now, what were they used for? They were used to keep track of different things, right? So to keep kind of like an accounting record of things that were being traded or things that were being given, let's say, to the temple. And archaeologists find these things. So what happened? Around 3600 BC, it looks like what people in Mesopotamia started to do is they started to take those tokens. And before we move on, I should say that tokens have some advantage over recording, let's say, with notches on the stick. With notches on the stick, you can't record different things, and also you can't subtract. Right? You can only add. With tokens, you could add and subtract. So what happened is they started to find that the clay tokens were now in balls of clay that were rolled over with a stone that had carvings in it to form a seal. Right? So they basically sealed the tokens inside of a clay ball. Now, why do people seal things? Well, they seal things to prevent people from tampering with items. And usually the people sealing something is someone in charge, someone who is important, who has, let's say, a special seal and puts some clay over something and seals it. And if it is open, they will know. It's not a lock. It won't prevent someone from opening it, but they will be able to tell if anyone has tampered with it. So these kinds of officials didn't want anyone tampering with the numbers of different amounts of goods and things like that. This is why things are still sealed today. One of the reasons why, as we'll see, we'll talk more about this, why people in Mesopotamia started to use clay is because they didn't have a lot of trees or other things that they could use for writing, but they had tons of clay. So it was everywhere. And the great thing for archaeology is the clay preserves well. So we still have this writing after so many years. Now, it's not writing yet because it's still just these tokens in the clay ball. But what started to happen was they started to find these clay balls with impressions in them on the outside. And what they figured out is that the impressions were indicating the amount of tokens that were on the inside of the clay ball. Then someone realized, hey, well, guess what? We don't need the tokens anymore, right? If we can make symbols that represent the tokens and we've got a seal, we don't actually need the tokens. And these became the first tablets, right? So these tablets have a seal rolled on the surface, and then they have these signs that indicate amounts of different things. Then they started to draw the tokens. Here you can see a fish. Here you can see this, an eye, a snout, an ear. This is a boar or a pig. Here's a jar. All of the cones and dots represent numbers. So essentially, this is a receipt. This is how many of this, how many of that. This is an economic recording tool. Then what happened is it started to get a little bit more developed. They started to realize, hey, you know what? It's hard to write this way. Let's write sideways. It's much easier. They start to write the signs sideways. So this is representing something that would be straight up and down. It looks like an arrow stuck in the wall. Straight up and down, it looks like barley or wheat. That's what it represents. It's drawn deliberately on its side like that. This is the amount of time, the amount of barley, and maybe what it's used for. So this is very early writing, but it's still not able yet to record the complexity of the Mesopotamian language at that time, right? It's just a very rudimentary system. This symbol represents this. It's pictographic. Each symbol represents an item or a something. And they have a segesimal system, which means divisible by 60. The reason why we divide the hour into 60 minutes is because of Mesopotamia, right? That's a system that goes back to ancient Mesopotamia. Okay, so what's happened so far? We had clay tokens, and we had clay tokens sealed in the ball. Then we had tablets, right, with numbers and different things. What's the next stage? They wanted to make it easier to write. So they realized instead of drawing in the clay, if they took a reed that had kind of a pointed edge, they could actually push the reed in the clay and make these wedge-shaped characters. It was a lot faster. These wedge-shaped characters are called cuneiform. You've probably heard that expression before, cuneiform. So cuneiform just means wedge-shaped writing. So this is the next stage of development. And all of the different pictures become, as you can see, over time, more and more abstract. But, originally, something that represented head looked like a head. Something that represented bread looked like the bowl that it was baked in. A head and a bread meant to eat. This is a cow's head, a plow, a carp. By 700 BC, they're very, very abstract cuneiform. Right? And even the numbers became cuneiform. Okay, now you're going to get your chance to do a little bit of cuneiform. I'm going to show you a little bit how this was done, and you're going to try and write 16 sheep. Right? This is something that a bureaucrat would have done. The writing of Mesopotamia, it looks like, originated to keep track of economic accounts. It was a record-keeping system with economic purposes. That's why it originated. Here you can see a scribe here with a clay tablet and a reed stylus. So I'm going to show you how that was done in just a sec. Okay, so if you have a piece of clay and you have a chopstick at home, you might be able to do this. If you got Sculpey or Play-Doh or something like that, and you take a piece of this and you kind of flatten it into a tablet like so, right? You'll get something like one of these Mesopotamian cuneiform tablets. Right? Then if you take your chopstick and you use the edge, right, and you place it kind of at an angle, if you do it like so, you'll get a small wedge. And if you do it more like this, you'll get a longer wedge, right? So let's try something like that. You could kind of see a longer wedge. Let me do a little bit better job with that. So if you place it kind of like this, you'll get a small wedge. And if you place it more at an angle, you're going to get, it's going to be lengthened like so. So it will be a slightly longer wedge. Now, in order to do the numbers, you use the round part of the chopstick. If you put it straight up and down like this, you'll get a dot, and the dot represents 10. Now, if you place the round part at an angle, you're going to get a cone like that. And a cone represents 1. So you want to record 16 sheep. Now, the great thing about clay is, of course, if you make a mistake, you just crumple up and roll it out again into kind of a tablet. The tablets were not flat pancakes. They were sort of thick. They had to stand up to, to some abuse. So they weren't be these things that shattered on impact. They would be, something kind of like this, right? Okay, so in order to make 16 sheep, you're going to kind of make a box, and it's easier to turn the tablet than it is to turn the stylus. So you could turn the tablet, but you kind of make a box. And I'm not doing a great job, but I'll show you. And then you make a cross in the middle of the box. I didn't do such a great job this time, but something like that. And then to make 16, you would do 1 dot for 10, like that. And then you would make 6 cones. And that would be 16. So it would be kind of held up like this. Here you go, 16 sheep. So try it. I'm going to show you the picture again so you get an idea of what it looks like, and you'll get to practice a little cuneiform. Okay, so here again is 16 sheep. You can see the kind of wedges right here and the little cross in the middle. That is the cuneiform version of that round token that we saw before that had the cross in it. Sheep, and then you can see the number 16. So that's what it should look like if you were doing it like the ancient Mesopotamians were. Okay, so what goes on next? Well, over time, the symbols become more abstract, as we said before. The numbers are written in cuneiform. Most texts from ancient Mesopotamia are economic. They're recording things like you see on this tablet, which is how many young sheep, right, from this person was given to that person in this year, that kind of thing. It's essentially like a receipt that we would have. Okay, what's the next stages? Well, here you can see a symbol for person. Here's the symbol for barley. Let's look at barley for a second. Over time, that symbol for barley becomes more and more abstract, but it continues to represent barley. Right? Here you can see it here. Until you get to a certain point where barley, the symbol for barley, no longer represents barley, but it represents the sound of the word barley. And so this symbolizes a syllable, and written together with these other symbols, so you can see here, it sounds out shi erku, which means fig cake. At this point, this no longer represents barley. It represents a sound. This represents a sound. It spells out a word. It becomes a syllabic writing system rather than being pictographic, where each picture represents one thing. It's syllabic. Each picture represents a syllable, a complex unit of sound. If English was a syllabic writing system, what would this say? Belief, right? Exactly, belief. And so when you have that, then you can write all sorts of things in ancient Mesopotamian writing. Right? But even before that stage, the Mesopotamians were recording things like the Epic of Gilgamesh. And the Epic of Gilgamesh, there's actually a flood story similar to the flood story in the Bible. There are tablets that are now in museum collections that are being translated that have never been translated before. For example, I thought this was kind of funny. Some tablets had never been deciphered before. They looked at them recently, or not that long ago, and they found out that, well, this was 2012, that some of them were jokes and riddles. And one of them, they said, was the oldest Yo Mama joke. Right? It goes, of your mother is by the one who has intercourse with her. What or who is it? But the answer is broken off of the tablet, so we'll never know the answer. It's a mystery lost to history, unfortunately. There are other ones, like in your mouth and your teeth, constantly stare at you, the measuring vessel of your Lord. What is it? Beer. Obviously, there's something lost in translation. But overall, what we can say is that Mesopotamian writing developed slowly over several hundred years, and it was mainly invented to keep track of economic accounting. So it was mainly developed for economic purposes, and then later on, it was used for all sorts of things. Right? Okay, so now let's look at Egyptian writing. Well, in Egyptian writing was invented, not developed over a long period of time. It happened very quickly compared to Mesopotamian writing. Egyptian writing does not have a connection to Mesopotamian writing. It's a different system. Egyptian language is a different language. So it was invented, we think, independently for different reasons. It was syllabic at the beginning, as compared to Mesopotamian writing, which was pictographic and then became syllabic. So this is not telling a story about a bird and a fish. It is representing syllables that sound out a name. And actually, this symbol, early on in Egyptian history, indicates that this is the name of a king, as you can see here. And so Egyptian hieroglyphs were developed specifically for political purposes, right? That is not keeping track of how many sheep went to the temple, but keeping track of the king's possessions and other important people's possessions. These are tags, essentially, with names that were tied onto objects that were placed in tombs. So it's indicating kings, and it's indicating ownership. So political uses. Now, how do archaeologists decipher hieroglyphs? Well, we're used to hieroglyphs like this, right? And very different from Mesopotamian writing. Egyptian hieroglyphs never lose this quality. On temples, the bird characters still look like birds. The lions still look like lions. They don't become abstract on the temples. They do become abstract. You can see here, this is something called hieratic. This is another version of it. It does become abstract on the papyrus scrolls, where not many people are going to see it. On things that everyone's going to see, it's formal like this. On papyrus scrolls, it's cursive like this. So how did people decipher it? Well, they depended on this famous object, the Rosetta Stone. So I want you to watch the next video about the person who deciphered hieroglyphs from the Rosetta Stone. He was a French linguist by the name of Champollion. And it's really a fascinating video, and I think it will show you, it's only 20 minutes, it will show you how they actually were able to crack the code of Egyptian hieroglyphs. And then after that, we'll come back and we'll talk some more.